It should have been impossible. The weapon that Ukraine used wasn't designed for what it just pulled off. The target that the weapon hit was supposed to be agile enough to avoid what Ukraine sent its way. To most, the move that Ukraine pulled off would be so outside the realms of possibility that it wouldn't have been thought of. But impossible odds have never stopped Ukraine before. And now it's done something that has never been done before. A world-first air kill has left Russia stunned. All Vladimir Putin and his cronies can do now is stand, mouths agape, and wonder just how Ukraine managed to do it. The location was deep inside the Rostov Oblast, and the target was a Russian Mi-8 helicopter. This is far from a new target for Ukraine. As of November 17th, Russia has already seen 41 of these helicopters destroyed, with another 12 being damaged and 1 captured after defection. However, it's not the target that is the impressive thing about what Ukraine just achieved. It's how Ukraine took that target down. On November 23rd, the Kyiv Independent reported on Ukraine's remarkable feat. It says that the country's Special Operations Forces, or SSO, managed to take an Mi-8 helicopter down near the settlement of Kuchenikovo in the Rostov Oblast. So far, standard. Outside of the destruction of a Russian helicopter happening on Russian territory, the destruction of an Mi-8 isn't huge news for Ukraine. However, the weapon that Ukraine used was unlike any that it had used for this purpose. Russia's Mi-8 was taken out by an aerial drone, and not one of the first-person view or other short-range drones that Ukraine has used for this purpose before. Ukraine used a long-range drone, a drone that is supposed to travel hundreds of miles into Russia to take down a stationary target. This is a world first because long-range drones simply aren't supposed to have the ability to change course or be controlled in a manner that allows them to strike an airborne target hundreds of miles away. Usually, Ukraine sets the coordinates for a ground-based target, such as a Russian oil refinery, and lets the drone do most of the work. This time, it appears that a Ukrainian operator has managed to steer a long-range drone into a moving aerial target that is tiny compared to what the drone is usually tasked with striking. The SSO provides the details in a Telegram post. "We are changing the rules of the game. Now we are hunting. For the first time, a Russian Mi-8 helicopter was shot down in the air by a deep strike SSO drone," the SSO declares. Each mission requires creativity, starting from the technical characteristics of the vehicle, ending with the planning and training of pilots, the SSO added in what can only be seen as a teasing statement that amounts to rubbing Putin's face in a strike that Russia's leader, along with his military brass, would have never thought possible. As the SSO says, Russia now has a lot of questions to answer, the most important of which is how Ukraine managed to pull this off. The SSO isn't telling. It says that only the Mi-8 crew that Ukraine just destroyed know the answers, but they will not tell. They can't. Their helicopter just plummeted from the sky in a ball of flames thanks to Ukraine's long-range drone. It all sounds a little too good to be true. Indeed, the Kyiv Independent points out that it hasn't been able to independently confirm the veracity of the SSO's claims. If this were Russia making the claim, we would already be suggesting that this is a propaganda story designed to make the Russian military seem stronger and more adept than it really is. So why aren't we saying the same about Ukraine? The answer is simple: the SSO provided footage. While the SSO hasn't revealed what type of drone it used for its world-class strike, though there is a theory that we'll explain later in the video, it has published a video showing what happened to Russia's helicopter. The 25 seconds of footage are shot from the drone's point of view, suggesting that this particular long-range drone offers the same sort of real-time sharing of data as the short-range FPV drones that Ukraine has used throughout the war. For the first few seconds, we see nothing but fields and countryside. Then the Mi-8 appears. Emerging from the bottom of the shot, the Russian chopper is flying away from Ukraine's drone. Whether the crew is aware of what is following them or not is irrelevant because the drone is fast enough to catch up to the Russian chopper. For a moment, the drone ascends, and the Mi-8 falls out of shot. But toward the end of the clip, the Ukrainian drone begins its descent with the Mi-8 clearly in its sights. We don't see the feed cut out, which would confirm a strike. But based on the footage that is available, there is no way that Russia's chopper could have avoided the fate that the SSO had in store for it. In its report on Ukraine's world-first strike, Army Recognition points out that this attack couldn't have possibly been pulled off using the type of FPV drone that Ukraine has so often deployed on the battlefield. Kuchenikovo is about 190 kilometers, or around 118 miles, from the war's front lines, which immediately rules out FPV drones. According to the New Voice of Ukraine, even the rangiest of those drones can only travel for around 20 kilometers, or 12.4 miles. If they could travel further, it's unlikely that they will be able to reach the kind of altitude needed to get above an Mi-8 flying at the heights seen in the video that the SSO released. This was something else. And, as Army Recognition puts it, if confirmed, this operation would mark a new stage in the use of unmanned systems, where drones are employed not only against static infrastructure, but also as active hunters of enemy aviation. We'll explain how a little later. First, let's return to something that we mentioned earlier in the video. We've told you that Ukraine used a long-range drone to kill the Russian Mi-8, and that this is something that has never been done before. However, we also just told you that the SSO didn't reveal the type of drone that it used in its world-first strike. However, there can only be one contender, the FP-1. That's the drone that Army Recognition points to as the one that the SSO used, and there is evidence to suggest that it is. Developed by a company named Firepoint, FP-1 is a long-range kamikaze drone that was designed to strike targets in the Russian deep rear. It's far from a new drone. Rumblings about its existence began in 2022, and it entered mass production in 2024. Right now, Ukraine is building around 3,000 of these drones per month, meaning an approximate production rate of about 100 units daily per the new Voice of Ukraine. The drone's specifications are impressive. It features a twin-cylinder engine that enables it to travel up to 1,600 kilometers or around 994 miles. While that doesn't make it capable of hitting any target inside Russia, with the country's Far East being out of range, it does allow Ukraine to strike facilities that are key to Russia's military in central Russia. Moscow is also within the FP-1's range, making it a very dangerous drone for Russia to deal with, even when it isn't destroying helicopters dozens of miles away from its operator. A warhead weighing around 50 kilograms or about 110 pounds can be strapped to the FP-1, which means the drone packs more than enough punch to destroy an Mi-8. Ukraine can also ensure this drone reaches its target due to a purpose-built algorithm that the new Voice of Ukraine says is resistant to the GPS spoofing that Russia so often uses to send Ukraine's deep strike drones off course. So far, we see that the FP-1 has the range and the firepower to take down an Mi-8. However, the navigation system as described couldn't have been used. An Mi-8 is a moving target, so it's impossible to program an FP-1 with the coordinates of an Mi-8 that is in the air and expected to hit that helicopter after it's traveled dozens or hundreds of miles to the programmed location. But there's something that we haven't told you, and all we need to explain why the FP-1 must have been the drone that Ukraine used for its world-first strike is captured in a simple statement from the new Voice of Ukraine. The FP-1's onboard optical stations can transmit imagery. In other words, the FP-1 acts as a sort of hybrid between a programmable long-range strike drone and the FPV drones that are directed by operators on the Ukraine war battlefield. These optical stations allow whoever is behind an FP-1's controls to observe the sky in front of the drone. As we saw in the video that the SSO published, if that operator locates a target, they can direct the FP-1 to seek and destroy. That's what happened when the SSO took out an Mi-8 mid-flight. And Russia is still trying to figure out how Ukraine got so far ahead of it in the long-range drone arena. Having said all of this, what the SSO achieved wasn't a case of an FP-1 operator randomly coming across an airborne Mi-8 and deciding to take it out. The organization's Telegram post says there was an element of pre-planning to this operation, and Army Recognition builds upon that. Such missions demand customized technical configurations, meticulous planning, and highly trained crews, underscoring that each deployment represents a tailored, precision operation rather than a routine, long-range strike, the outlet says. It also points out that Russia had deployed the Mi-8 with the express purpose of shooting down Ukrainian drones, suggesting that Ukraine had launched a large drone assault against Rostov and that it knew how Russia would respond from a defensive perspective. Perhaps there's an element of baiting the Mi-8 at play here. The drones launched at Rostov would have had targets, of course, but the SSO may have also been using them as decoys to force Russia to send its chopper into the air, at which point the FP-1 honed in. Thanks to its optical sensors, the SSO could see exactly what it needed to hit, and it struck its target. There's one final piece of the puzzle that makes it almost certain that the FP-1 was chosen for this world-first strike. The drone is classed as a loitering munition. According to the IDGA, a loitering munition is designed to reach a target area and, as the name implies, loiter. The FP-1 operator was likely flying close to Rostov long before Russia unleashed its Mi-8 to deal with Ukraine's other drones. Watching and waiting, that operator chose the perfect time to strike. By the time the Mi-8 crew realized that it had been caught in a trap of Ukraine's design, assuming the crew noticed at all, it was far too late. The bait had worked, and one of Russia's most valuable helicopters was devastated. By now, it seems clear that the FP-1 was the weapon of choice for this world-first strike. However, it would also be easy to dismiss what the SSO just achieved as a one-off, a fluke perhaps, possibly made by an FP-1 just happening to be loitering in a region where Russia deployed an Mi-8. And while that could be the case, and it seems unlikely given the sheer accuracy of the strike, it seems far more likely that Ukraine has once again changed how drones are used in combat. This was no fluke. It was a calculated and coordinated strike that represents the next evolution in Ukraine's long-range capabilities. We've seen those capabilities evolve multiple times since the Ukraine war began. Ukraine started using drones to attack targets in the Russian deep rear in 2023 and had developed its drones to enable strikes on Russian territory itself by 2024. Those early strikes, though often effective, were also ad hoc. Ukraine would identify a potential target and try to hit it, with those targets often being determined by the availability of drones. As the war drew deeper into 2024, Ukraine started moving more of its long-range drones into mass production. More production meant more drones, and with more drones came the ability to conduct integrated campaigns that saw Ukraine launching multiple strikes against targets in the same region, often during the same day or in quick succession. Army recognition points to a Ukrainian strike on the Kirovska airfield in Crimea as a perfect example of how Ukraine evolved its strategy from one-off strikes to integrated attacks using its ever-widening selection of drones. In that earlier operation, Ukrainian drones targeted the aviation component of the base, as well as air defenses, ammunition depots, and enemy reconnaissance and strike UAVs, with available information pointing to the destruction of Mi-8, Mi-26, and Mi-28 helicopters, and a Pantsir S-1 air defense system, followed by secondary detonations during the night, the outlet says, of that series of strikes. More recently, Ukraine has been focusing its long-range drones on Russia's energy sector, as Defense News notes. Refineries have been a major target for Ukraine, especially in the latter half of 2025. By October, Ukraine was believed to have knocked out as much as 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity due to these types of strikes, though the exact number is disputed. Fuel depots, military and command posts, and Russian electricity generation facilities have also become victims of Ukraine's strikes, which are often carried out en masse over the course of a night, involving hordes of drones that target several regions of Russia. Ukraine has been stretching Russia's air defenses as thin as possible with these new strikes. However, you'll notice that there is something that all of these types of targets we just mentioned have in common. From the grounded helicopters at Kirovska to Russia's oil refineries and its electrical substations, every one of these long-range targets is static. There is no movement involved, which means Ukraine could program a strike location into its drones and then launch. The drone would handle the rest. Now, Ukraine has evolved its long-range strike capability again. Moving targets are now on the agenda, including aerial targets that combine speed and a certain amount of agility, which should mean that they're more capable of avoiding Ukraine's drones. The Mi-8 that Ukraine hit was never meant to be an asset that Ukraine could target with its long-range drones. At least, that's what Russia would have thought. But the SSO just did it, and the odds are that this isn't a one-off strike. Rather, Ukraine has just proven that the supposedly impossible is eminently possible, and it may have just created a new doctrine shift in the process. Russia's helicopters now have more than surface-to-air missiles to worry about. Ukraine has figured out how to deploy its long-range strike drones, or at least its FP-1s, in an air ambush role that makes them as effective as any other air defenses that are in the country's arsenal. That newfound ability couldn't have come at a better time for Ukraine. According to Defense Security Asia, Russia has found ways to make choppers, particularly its attack helicopters, an absolute nightmare for Ukraine. These aircraft were once almost laughed out of the Ukraine war. They were flying coffins, the outlet says, as demonstrated by the fact that Ukraine managed to shoot so many of them down during the first year of the war. Russia has paid a heavy price for flying its helicopters low and slow over Ukrainian territory. A lot has changed since then, and Russia has found ways to make its choppers usable again. The Mi-8 that Ukraine just took down with an FP-1 was deployed in a defensive capacity. Other Russian helicopters are now able to attack Ukraine from a distance due to having precision-guided weapons and electronic warfare support that makes them much harder to shoot down. Surface-to-air missiles are rarely an option for Ukraine anymore, as Russia's helicopters are rarely within range of these types of weapons. But long-range drones, they're ideal for countering the Russian chopper threat, especially when those drones can loiter like an FP-1. On a strategic level, Ukraine doing the supposedly impossible with its long-range drones could cause Russia to engage in an entire rethink of its aerial strategy, at least when it comes to helicopters. Army recognition explains how, stating, "If Russian helicopter crews assigned to intercept Ukrainian drones perceive that they can be targeted at operational depth, the risk calculus and operational tempo of Russian air operations will shift. The same could apply to helicopter crews assigned to launch precision-guided weapons at Ukraine from within the Russian deep rear. What were once relatively straightforward assignments that carried minimal risk have suddenly become much more dangerous. There could always be an FP-1 lurking out of sight when a Russian chopper takes to the skies. That threat alone could be enough to force a change in Russian strategy. And it's not just the loss of talented helicopter crews that will sting Russia if Ukraine starts transforming more of its FP-1s into chopper killers. Putin has happily allowed his country to lose over 1.16 million of its people, death or injury, since he launched his invasion. So human collateral isn't high on his list of concerns. Money, on the other hand, is very high on that list, and Ukraine cost Russia a lot with its impossible strike. According to Defense Express, a single Mi-8 helicopter costs Russia somewhere in the region of $6 million, making the loss of these choppers a painful financial hit for Putin. However, Ukraine's weapon of choice makes the loss all more damaging. An FP-1 drone costs Ukraine just $55,000 to build. That means Ukraine achieved a 109 times return on investment with the SSO's attack on an Mi-8 using the FP-1. Those numbers don't add up to anything good for Russia, and they also don't account for whatever weapons were loaded into the Mi-8 or the helicopter's crew members. This insane return on investment plays right into the forced strategic shift that we mentioned earlier. Whenever Russia sends one of its Mi-8s into the sky from now on, it will have to weigh the potential loss of $6 million of hardware against whatever damage that helicopter is anticipated to do. Risk versus reward has just been made a bigger factor than ever in these types of deployments, and it's all thanks to the SSO's world-first strike against a helicopter using a long-range drone. Will Ukraine be able to repeat this strike? It certainly has the blueprint now, though the caveat is that a lot of planning went into what the SSO pulled off. In the future, Ukraine will need to know the locations of Russia's choppers and, as it did in Rostov, may need to bait them into the skies. But the return on investment is impressive enough for Ukraine to keep trying. Even when it fails, the drone it loses isn't expensive, and when Ukraine succeeds, Russia loses pilots and millions of dollars. The impossible just became possible, and Ukraine may soon make the possible mundane. It's evolutions like these that have allowed Ukraine to inflict such devastating losses on Russia since Putin launched his invasion. However, Russia should be doing much better on the aerial front of the war. The country has failed to achieve air superiority in Ukraine and is now further away from doing so than ever before. Find out why in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes against Russia's valuable military assets. And thank you for watching.